Hey, what is going on, everybody? It is Rob, aka The Diligent Dev, and I just want to start this video by wishing everybody a happy new year. I hope you killed it last year, and I hope you're ready to learn about Azure Functions this year, because in this series, we're going to be covering how to create a REST API utilizing Azure Functions and Node.js along with Azure Storage tables. So without any further ado, let's jump over to the computer and get right into it. Okay, so here we are over at the computer, and the first thing you're going to want to do, if you don't already have one, is sign up for an Azure account. And then once you've signed up for your Azure account, go ahead and log into their portal. When you log in, you'll see a screen similar to this, and up here at the top, we're just going to search for storage. Then we're going to go click Create. And then you're going to want to choose the subscription. You may have a couple in here, just choose whatever one's applicable to you. And then a resource group. And if you don't have resource groups, you can click right here to create a new one. Next, we need to create a storage account name, and you want to make this unique and also identifiable for your account. So that way, when you have a bunch of storage accounts in here, you'll know which one to go to. And we're just going to say REST API, or actually you can't put dashes in, REST API tut. And then everything else should be good. Click Review and Create. And then once this button is ready, go ahead and click Create. Now, once this is done with the deployment process, I will be right back. Now that everything's been deployed successfully, we can click on Go to Resource. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to Access Keys. And right here, you're going to want to copy this key. So just click Show Keys and then go ahead and copy this key and save it for later. And you're also going to want to copy your storage account name or remember it, because we're going to need it in subsequent parts for this tutorial. The next thing you're going to want to do is download the Azure Storage Explorer. And this is a little application that allows you to view all of your storage accounts and everything inside of those accounts. So I already have it downloaded, so I'm not going to do it. So go ahead and pause the video here and download it for yourself. Once you have it downloaded, go ahead and log into your Azure account. And you can do that by clicking on this little account icon. Next, it'll show you all of your Azure subscriptions and your storage accounts when you get in here. So mine is under Personal Pay-as-you-go, Storage Accounts, and our REST API tut. Open that up, and then we're going to go to Tables, and we're going to right-click on this, and we're going to create a table, and we're going to call it Posts. And just hit Enter, and now it has created an Azure Storage table called Posts for us. And now that we have our Azure Storage account and our Azure Storage table created for our post, what we're going to do is start creating our REST API. So the first thing you're going to want to do, if you don't already have installed, is install the Azure tab. We're going to find our Functions tab inside of here, and I'm going to click this little folder with a lightning bolt. And it's going to open up my file explorer and ask me where I want to save this. So I'm going to save it on the desktop. I'm going to create a new folder called REST API tut, and then I'm going to select that. Next, it's going to ask me what language I want to use. For this tutorial, we're just going to use JavaScript. It's going to ask us what template we want to use. We are going to use an HTTP trigger. And then it's going to ask us what we want to call our trigger function. And we'll say CreatePost. It's going to ask us what authorization level. Since we're not going to be implementing authorization in this tutorial, we'll just select anonymous. And then we're going to open in current window. And if we take a look inside of our project, we see we have one folder. And this is where our function is going to live. We have our index.json or index.js where all of the code lives. And then we have our function.json, which holds all of the settings for our function. Now inside of our function.json, we see that we have this methods array, and this function accepts a get method and a post. So for our create post, all I want to do is have the post method. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of this get. Going to go ahead and save this. Now the next thing we're going to do is set up a service to interact with our Azure Storage. So in the root directory, I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call it Services. And inside of there, I'm going to create a new file called tableservice.js. The next thing we need to do is open up a terminal, because we are going to install the Azure Storage SDK. So in here, we're going to run npm I Azure Storage. Now to initialize Azure Storage inside of our table service, we're going to say const Azure equals require Azure Storage. And then we're going to create our table service. So we're going to say const table svc equals azure.createTableService. And inside of here, as the first parameter, we need to pass in the name of our storage account. So I'm going to pass in REST API tut. And then the next thing we need to do is pass in our access key. Now I don't want to check the access key into GitHub or any other repository system. So what we're going to do is go to this local settings.json, and underneath here in this values object, we're going to say Azure Storage access key. And then we're going to set that equal to, just go ahead and plug in your access key here. And then back in our table service.js file, we can just go ahead and reference that local settings.json. So we can say process.env.Azure Storage access key. The next thing we're going to do is work on our method to insert an entity into our table. So I'm going to say const insert entity. We're going to pass in a table name and the entity, and that way we can make it generic and we could use this on more than just the post table. Now the Azure SDK returns a callback function instead of a promise, and I want to use async await inside of our function. So what I'm going to do is wrap this in a promise. So I'm going to say return new promise. We'll add the resolve and reject. And then what we're going to say is table service insert entity. We're going to pass it the table name and the entity. And then this is the callback function. So we have an error, result, and a response. If we do get an error, we're going to go ahead and reject this. Else we're going to resolve it. And what we want to do right after entity here is I want to pass it some options. So inside here, I'm going to say echo content, and I'm going to set that to true. So that way, when we insert into the table, it returns us the records that we can return it to our controller. And then we're also going to say payload format, and we're going to set this to application/JSON, and then a semicolon and OData equals no metadata. I'm going to hit Alt-Shift-F to format this so we can get a good look at it. So essentially what this is doing is there will be some metadata that's returned on the object, and I don't really want it. I just want the actual object that we passed in or that has been inserted into our post table. And then down at the bottom here, I'm just going to export this function. So I'm going to say exports.insertEntity equals insert entity. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. Next, we'll head back to our function. And then above module exports, we're going to import our method we just created for insert entity. Next, inside of our function, I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of all of this. We're going to wrap everything in a try catch. So go ahead and take this up here. Down here, we'll just paste this in. We're going to change the status to a 500 if we have an unexpected error. And I'm just going to pass back as the body. We'll say error.mess. Next up here in the try block, we're going to do some checks. So I'm going to say if rec.body. Then we're going to return a context.res. We will set the status of that equal to 400. This will be a bad request. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of all this. And as the body, we're going to say, please pass a request body. Underneath that check, we're going to say const blog title and content equals request.body. So essentially what this is saying is we're going to pass in a request body to this, and it's going to have properties of blog, title, and content. So below that, we're going to say if blog title or content is null, we're going to pass back a contact res, set it to a 400, and then we're going to set it to please pass blog title and content. And then below that, what we'll do is create our entity. Now, if we go look at their documentation for Azure Table Storage, you can either pass in your entities like this with an underscore in front of them, and it will go ahead and infer what type it is, or you can pass the type, or you can import this entity generator and then do something like entity generator dot string, date time. I believe there's float, integer. There's some other types you can pass in, but what we're going to do is just let it infer the type by passing them in like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const entity. I'm going to say partition key. We're going to pass in that underscore and then the blog. Then we're going to say row key. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the row key to new date dot get time dot toString. And then we're going to pass in the title, and we'll set that to an object with the underscore and then title, and then content will do the same thing. Now, when you're creating your entities in Azure Table Storage, the way that we're going to be retrieving these is by the partition key and the row key. So the way you want to think of a partition key with Azure Table Storage is a way to group similar items together. So in our case, we're going to group them by the user's blog name, which we're passing in here. And then the row key you can think of as an ID. Now, these two combined have to be unique for every single record. And one of the most important things to think of as far as fast reads is that you want a good partition key so it can eliminate a lot of data when you go to fetch your get by ID or get requests, and then your row key. And if you specify both of these together, it leads to super fast reads, like millisecond reads. If you have the partition key, it also leads to very fast reads. So you have to keep in mind the way you want to structure your data to pull it back out of the database. And these two things are the most important aspects of Azure Table Storage when you're creating your database. So below this, we're going to say const result equals await insert entity. We're going to insert it into the post table, and then we're going to pass in the entity. And then for the response body, we'll actually it defaults, the response status does default to 200, so we shouldn't have to pass it back here. But in the body, we'll just pass back the result. So I'm going to go ahead and save everything. And now we can start testing our function. So what we can do is I'm going to head here to this little debugger icon, and I'm going to click here. And it's going to run some commands, and then it's going to spin up a development server for us. And it looks like we got something here. So services, table service, can't find that. So let's go back and see what we named that. So we're up one. I think maybe I'm missing that. So I'm going to relaunch this again. Okay, cool. So now what it's done is spun up a development server running on localhost 7071, and we have our method right here. So what we can do is just go ahead and copy this out, and you can use any sort of API testing tool like Postman's or Insomnia. I like to stay inside of Visual Studio Code, so I've been using Thunder Client. And what we're gonna do is do a new request, and you'll see this looks very similar to Postman or whatever else you've been using. I'll leave a link to this down in the description. I really enjoy using it. But we're going to go ahead and paste that in. We're going to change the method to a post. And just to check some of our validation, I'm just going to go ahead and hit it without a request body. and we see we're getting an error, and it's saying invalid URL. Because I had a space in between there. So let's go ahead and do it now. And it looks like it's not hitting this, which is actually kind of good, because what I want to do is go into our index.json or JS file. And what we can do is we can set a breakpoint here, and let's see what's getting passed in here when we hit it. So let's do a send. We'll do rec.body. Okay, it's undefined. And I see what the issue is. So we do specify the res to return, but we're not actually returning out of the function. So this is one of the reasons I love Azure Functions, because you can actually just go ahead and debug it without any other setup. So what I'm going to do is save that, and it's going to kick us out. So we have to relaunch the debugger. And we see that it's spun up. So let's go back to our request. Let's hit send. It should kick us back out of this. So if we go look, we got our 400. It's saying, please pass a request body. So let's go back. I'm going to remove this breakpoint. Let's go to our body. Let's specify some JSON content. So I also want to test the other validation that we have. So we'll pass in everything except for content. So we're going to say blog. We'll set this either to diligent dev. Then we'll say title, my first blog post. And actually, I'm not going to pass in content because I want to make sure that that validation also fires. So I'll hit it and it says, please pass blog, title, and content. So let's pass in our content. And we'll set that equal to, this is my first blog post. Okay, and then we're going to hit send, and we're getting an error here. So it's saying that this is not found. So I must not have put in, I see that I missed the T in rest. So let's go back to the table client, go right here. I'm going to go ahead and save that. It's going to kick us back out, so we need to attach the debugger again. Let's go ahead and hit our request again. And now we see we get back all of our information, and it looks like it is still passing back the metadata. So I'm kind of glad that this happened, because if you see here, there's a lot of metadata inside of each one of these objects. What I want is exactly what we pass in. I kind of want this to be passed back. So let me go back to our table service. And let's see what's going on here. So to get the actual object back, instead of grabbing the result and returning it, what we want to do is grab the response and then the body of it. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to reattach the debugger, go back to our Thunder client, and we can see now we're going to pass in my second blog post, and this is my second blog post. So we're going to go ahead and hit send. And we see now we're getting the response back that I'm looking for. So it strips out a lot of that metadata and a lot of the junk that would make it difficult to keep track of this stuff if we were like in a front end application and putting this into state. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and add a few more. So we'll just say third, hit send. We get all that good stuff back. And let's do one more. And we're going to go ahead and send this. And then to check to make sure everything is getting inserted correctly, let's go ahead and open up our Storage Explorer. And then what I'm going to do is hit refresh. And now we see all of the data that we have inserted into our Azure Table Storage. So that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for part 1 in this series. In part 2, we'll look at implementing the other REST methods, such as get by ID, put, to update a post, and also delete to delete a post. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and enable notifications so you're notified when that video comes out. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns about this video, go ahead and drop a line in the comment section below. And until next time, happy coding.